thank you all. So I'm here to talk to you about how social media is changing communications. Topic I picked because social media is definitely changing my industry. I've got a hint, it's changing or is going to be changing your industry. Maybe not all for the better either, in terms of career development, unless you stay ahead of it. So hopefully that's what I'm going to help, is orient you to some of the things that are changing. The idea that it's changing communication itself might sound like kind of a radical proposition, but if you talk to people who study language, who study even the structure of the brain, they'll say that if you go back to the invention of writing, we basically developed this means of offloading our memories onto a piece of paper, or originally a piece of stone or clay or something. And so these things do have big impacts. The introduction of printed books, radio, television, all these things had an impact, and social media is going to have an impact too. We'll figure out how big of an impact as we go along. Now this is sort of the outline. I'll try and tell you who I am and why I think I'm qualified to be talking about this. And I'll go over some of the different types of social networks and the connection models. I think this doesn't exactly line up because I was moving a bunch of the slides around on my way over here this afternoon. And there is a movie break in here somewhere where I'm going to have a little video to show, and you might have to be quiet. I've got a couple of external speakers. They seem to make the Windows sound effects really loud, but whether you're going to be able to hear this person's voice, we might have to try and be quiet. And we'll talk about changing styles of communication. And, I don't think you guys have all been under a rock. I understand that you probably know something about social media. There are probably people in this room who know stuff that I don't know, and maybe you could correct me along the way. I tried to make this relevant by digging out some material about documentation and how documentation might change. And I know that some of you do more things and other things than just documentation. So if I go overboard there, try and give me some course corrections along the way. So I'm a writer, editor, and web consultant, currently a freelancer, currently a contractor, looking for projects, looking to be invited in to speak to people. For money would be nice. And to be a consultant, to be a writer, to do white papers. Now, I'm not the same kind of technical writer that a bunch of you are. I've never been a member of the STC. As you've heard, I've gotten it sort of secondhand through Beth Ann. I sort of know your world. I've heard a lot about what it's like to deal with engineers and other difficult people. So I used to be technology editor for Internet World magazine, which in the mid-90s kind of chronicled the rise of Netscape. You remember when Netscape was going to make Windows irrelevant? Well, it's actually sort of happening, just sort of in a delayed reaction. And then with Baseline magazine, which was more corporate, was more for CIOs, we did a lot of case studies about how people use technology, and also tried to figure out whether they were wasting their money. And currently, an editor for informationweek.com, again, on a freelance basis, they're toying with me about bringing me on staff. Even if they do, I'll still be looking for some of that other work in the evenings or on the weekends. But so the Brainyard is basically a section on informationweek.com that deals with the impact of social media on business and how it's used for collaboration within business. And I'm also the creator of a couple of WordPress plugins. One of them is called Facebook Tab Manager. Facebook Tab Manager lets you use the WordPress editor to edit content, and then you can publish it, and you can have it show up on as a tab on a Facebook business page. And there's some other little tricks you can do there. And I've written my own documentation for this. And people comment on my documentation, and they tell me that it's unclear. And I have asked my wife for help, and she hasn't quite gotten around to that yet. So, moving along. So you're probably familiar with at least a couple of the ones on top. You probably have a membership in one or two of these. Facebook is the big one. Twitter is the one with the short messages and the funny codes. LinkedIn is where everybody's profile is a resume. It has the reputation of being boring. I am told by Facebook fans that LinkedIn is for old people because the average age is something in the low 40s. Then you have some specialized ones. Foursquare is something that people use on their phones. I don't, but people do. They check in with their GPS coordinates when they walk into a restaurant, and they see if maybe there is a special that the restaurant is offering to them. They leave little notes to each other attached to these coordinates. And there's some other aspects about that I'll get into later. Wikipedia might be a little bit more relevant to this group because this wiki style of collaborative editing is something that is invading documentation in some ways. You know, I've seen open source projects that are doing all their documentation on a wiki, and sometimes it doesn't work out so well because every page that you go to is said, you know, add content here. They haven't quite gotten around to that. And I write a lot about enterprise social networks. So these are things that are used within companies, for collaboration within companies that are sort of Facebook-style interaction, or Twitter-style interaction, where everybody has a profile, and they post their status, and they watch the feeds of things. Apparently, Tyco is a Yammer customer. Mike, do you guys use it, or? Yeah. Okay. I mean, I just found that out from a press release today, because they're putting out an update. So that's another way that this is coming in. And also, a lot of other types of software are taking on social characteristics. There are project management systems that also have this notion of the status update. And to some extent, they're trying to do away with the more formal kind of project plans where you have, you know, Gantt chart showing exactly when things are supposed to start and end and who's going to be allocated. And the idea is, well, we'll just tell each other what we're doing. And for some informal kind of projects, that can work really well. Also, I've had people, sometimes these are grafted onto the formal project management, and I've had project managers tell me that this is useful because they could never get people to fill out the structured forms, but they'll chatter away about what they're doing. And so she can kind of keep an eye on them. Also, in your industry, there's a company called SDL that has been doing a promotion on the death of technical documentation. Actually, the death of technical documentation as we know it, because they sell the technical documentation folks. This is a company that does, I guess, single sourcing of documentation that could be in print, could be online. They also own some quite a bit of translation memory and machine translation technology. But anyways, this is I won't read this all to you, but this is basically an indictment of documentation as being boring and text only and not interactive. And you know, hopefully some of you are saying that, you know, that's not my documentation, that's not what we do. But you know, one of the things that they're selling is a system, I believe it's called live content. And the idea behind this is that every piece of content will exist almost as sort of a blog post where people can comment back on it. And the idea is that the people who come in, this would really need to be online, else it's not going to work too well in the book, but the people who come in and find that things are confusing will be able to post their comments, and they have the concept of these comments making a round trip back to the writer and hopefully feeding into improvements to that documentation. So it's sort of taking some of the style of the wikis and the blogs and other things, and I think maybe bringing it into more formal documentation. And this is another approach. I put this in at the last minute. I met these guys at the last STC meeting that I attended. It was something on Camtasia and how you use this to produce programs and tutorials. And these folks were in the audience because they use Camtasia all the time. And this is them sitting in their office, which is an RV, that they drive around the country, giving presentations as they go about, well, the photographers in the audience should be interested because let's see, what is her name? I'm missing it. The last name is Gulf. It's Jim and something Gulf. But she's one of the biggest experts on the use of the Google Picasso tool for managing photos. So what she does is she gives lectures on technologies that are relevant to people who are traveling a lot, and then drives them to their website, and she has a subscription website that she's actually apparently making quite a bit of money on. So she gives away a bunch of free simple tutorials, and then if you want the really good stuff, you pay a subscription for a year, and she's developing a recurring stream of income. So this is somebody who's using, she used to own a technical communication company in Fort Lauderdale. She's gone on the road doing this. Different type of technical communicator, but she definitely uses blogs and social media and the rest of it to promote that too. So now I've been talking kind of loosely about social media. There are actually several different related concepts. First, there's the media part, which is the idea that people are creating all this content, most of which that is in sort of their network of posting back and forth to each other. But there's the media part. There's also the network part. So the social network is just a computer model of how we're related to each other. And the rules of these networks are different. Well, I'll get into more of this later, but the ground rules for how connections get formed and what it means when they get formed in terms of whether things are automatically shared or how those rules work. Those determine a lot about the communication. And then community content would be all sorts of things where the users are really contributing to content. Wikipedia being one of the biggest examples. Wikipedia gets a bad rap sometimes from people who say that it's full of inaccurate stuff. I actually think that over time they've built in a lot of pretty good course-correcting mechanisms where if you go to an article that contains unreliable information, it's likely to be flagged as this contains unreliable information, or this does not have enough good references in it. This reads like a piece of marketing. And they've also had to deal with people going in and prettying up their own profile, their own biographies, or slamming their political opponents. They've dealt with a lot of that stuff over time. Crowdsourcing is I call it the Tom Sawyer getting the neighbors to pay the fence thing, made digital. It's where companies are going out and say, sign up on our website and tell us what our next product should be. Sign up on our website and come up with ideas for our next ad campaign. And if they get enough people to do that, and often there's also a mechanism for voting up or down. So when you sign up, you can vote up or down what you think are the best ideas. Organizations use this internally. Internally, it seems to be called ideation, but it's essentially the same thing. You're going out to the employees, you're asking them, what should we do next? Well, let's brainstorm on this. It's a way of taking that online. And then gamification, the heck of a word, is this idea of basically how do you make things fun. Now, sometimes that amounts to actually making a game out of something. Adobe recently created a game around learning Photoshop. Now, they're doing this because they have a lot of amateur photographers, we keep coming back to photographers, who download the free trial version of Photoshop. And Photoshop over the years has accumulated thousands of features. So they try this thing out and they're completely bewildered and they never wind up signing up. So what they came up with was a tutorial that kind of gives you reinforcement along the way and tries to get you through those first 10 lessons to tell you how to lighten a photo, darken a photo, crop it, all those basics that you need to know to make the thing useful. And they're doing a split testing thing on it where they only make that available to like half the people who download the product so they can see whether the conversion rate is actually better. Oh, that last screen I also had some icons from a shopping site at the bottom too. So that's another place where you see this is they're trying to make people who shop the most or even who just post the most reviews on products, give them little rewards and recognitions along the way. The big broad trend is that we're going away from this old world where the content comes down from the publishers or the corporate head office. It's all one way, pretty much, from them down to you. Now we have connections going all over the place. And we have people commenting back to the publishers. We have people commenting back to the CEO. We have them talking to each other as much as they're talking back. We have them creating the content. So stuff is going zigzag all over the place. And we also have this mobile thing going on where people are doing stuff on their phones and their tablets. And that's another way that things are kind of going in all directions at once. And we do wind up with a world where some of the best journalism, even though journalists don't like to refer to it this way, is done by amateurs, is done by bloggers. May have a world, in some cases, where some of the best documentation for the best examples of how to use a product is created by the people. So, power to the people. But, at the same time, as professionals, we have to figure out how we maintain our place in all. And this is a game of big numbers. Facebook, I think, is actually more like 850 million users now. It's been growing fast. Let's see, this was 10,000 times the number of photos that are in the Library of Congress. And the thing that I actually thought initially was more impressive is, so 250 million photo uploads per day winds up being 7 billion per month. Now 7 billion is more than the total that have been added to Flickr, which is specifically a photo sharing website, since 2004. So Facebook is a big deal. Enough said there. I talked a little bit about the rules of how connections get formed and how information gets passed around. These are sort of the two basic ones, although these are changing and mutating. But Facebook had this idea of where you go out and you say, will you be my friend? And the person you approach, say, will you be my friend? Says yes or no. And depending on whether or not that happens, a connection is formed. And that means that we can see each other's updates, pretty much. Again, some of these things are changing. So that's a reciprocal process, sharing between friends. I've done searchable, not so much. I mean, there's nothing inherent to that model, but if you look at the way Facebook works, it's not very searchable. You can search for people, but you can't search for what people are talking about necessarily. But you can sort of discover things. So this is one of the things that has Google worried, is they thought they had the world cornered because everybody was going to the internet. In order to get anything useful out of the internet, you executed a search. And when you execute a search, they know what you're searching for, they know what you're interested in, they know how to advertise to you. But we're sort of migrating to this world where people instead look at what are their friends paying attention to, and that's what steers them more than their searches. At any rate, the Twitter model, the one that they originated and that you do see cropping up other places as well, is the follower. So that's not reciprocal, it's one way. So if I want to follow you, you basically can't stop me. I mean, in general, the people who are on Twitter are sort of blowing their own horn. They don't want to stop you. I think there is a setting where you can have a private profile, but very few people would take advantage of that. But it's one way. Now, some people, as a matter of habit, if you follow them, they will follow you back. I don't necessarily do it that way. I follow you back if you look interesting. But, you know, so I'm followed by a lot of PR people who are trying to see when I publish something, but I don't necessarily want to follow them back. I have different people, a list of people I want to follow. You're publishing to the world as opposed to just sharing between friends. And Twitter is searchable, and also you can use these things called hashtags. I meant to mention that if anybody feels the urge to tweet, you can do pound SOC STC, and that would be the hashtag for this meeting, if anybody feels inspired. Or afterwards, maybe I'll tweet some things out with that. But a hashtag is just an ad hoc keyword. There's no formal taxonomy. There's no guarantee that somebody isn't using that same code to mean something else. But it's, you know, when the revolution started happening in Egypt, one of the first places I saw that something was going on is there were all these tweets saying, "Pound Egypt." What's going on in Egypt? I had no idea at that point. But, you know, that was when it was just starting to bubble up. And yes, you can still discover, you can see who other people's friends and followers are, and you can retweet or share things out to other people. Now, LinkedIn is closer to this side. Facebook recently added something where if you want, you can enable your personal profile to have a subscription feature. So people can now subscribe to stuff that you're posting to your profile without necessarily being your friends. So some public figures might want to go that way rather than creating a separate page. And so on LinkedIn, it's supposed to be professional connections. It's not really, are you my friend? We might be business associates and never be friends. But it's still, do you want to be connected to me on a professional level? And Facebook does allow this, this follower model for businesses, organizations, and celebrities can create pages on their service, and also LinkedIn company pages. And Google Circles is yet another variation or mutation of this. So on Google Plus, which is a social network that's only been around for a few months now, when you're essentially deciding to follow people, but you add them to a circle. So you're categorizing people as you go. So you can have a friend circle, a colleague circle, or whatever. And these are some of my current circles. If you haven't tried this service, you probably should sign up for it just out of professional interest, if nothing else. It in some ways is sort of a best of the features of Facebook and Twitter, with some new twists thrown in. If you don't like hearing about people's Farmville lost sheep, so far they are not allowing that sort of thing. They do have some games, but they don't have automated feeds.
So do you have to have a Gmail account to?
Yeah, it's okay. It was first introduced. Yeah, it was associated with your Gmail identity. They consider that to be a separate identity. It does now work with Google Apps as well. So, for example, Card Communications is registered with Google, so that I use the Gmail software, but I use it through cardcommunications.com. And initially, they would not allow me to use that identity to sign up for Google+. They've just changed that. Unfortunately, I've now established a Google Plus account with the Gmail identity, and I'm waiting for them to come out with some tools they're promising where I can sort of, pack that up and move it over into the other camp. So we'll see how that develops. There are some other unique features there. I've been writing today about researching something called Google Hangouts, which is a video chat feature that can include up to 10 people. You basically just post, I want to hang out. And anybody else who's online at that moment can come in and hang out with you. It only goes up to 10 people right now, although they have a version where they'll allow other people to be observers. They did this on Good Morning America this morning, where they went out afterward, where I guess they projected it up on the Jumbotron in Times Square. And I was trying to get on it, but I couldn't quite figure out how that was going to work. So there are some unique features there, and I'll go into that more here. So Twitter is limited to 140 characters, and your links basically have to be shortened, particularly if you have like long search engine optimized posts, file names, because you've only got 140 characters. This was originally it's the limit of an SMS text message. So originally people would post to Twitter by sending messages from their phones, or some of them would. And so in order to make it phone compatible, they set that limit, and now they've had to live with it. And it has some virtues. People can't be terribly long-winded in 140 characters. So people are either putting out just brief thoughts. Some of them can be kind of haiku-like, or they're putting out a headline and a link. Usually, when I'm posting to it, I'm posting a headline and a link. I'm trying to get somebody to read my stories. Facebook has longer status posts. You can post something that includes a link. You can post photos, videos, and you can have these automated app and game updates to your feed, which is, you said, is sort of a mixed blessing. Although they have made it more possible over time for you to filter out the harmful posts if you don't care about them. They've also made it more possible for you to post. They have responded to this Google Circles things with some of their own new models, so that you can have a post that just goes out to your coworkers, or a post that just goes out to the people who live in your local area. So there's some ways of sort of cutting down the noise that are evolving over time. And Google, you can have quite long posts. People who are bloggers, some of them are giving up their blogs and just using their Google profiles, or Google Plus profiles, because you can write fairly long posts with some multimedia content. And actually, when it first launched, the search on Google Plus was crappy. So that was kind of sad. But it has gotten better over time, and Google Plus now supports these hashtags too. So that when you post something, you put pound whatever, it shows up as a link. I'm not sure if I explained that clearly, but the hashtag, really what it is saying is, this is not just a word that occurred in the sentence. This is a subject that I'm writing about. So that's sort of the distinction, because Google obviously will do a full text search, and you can just type in words. But if you search by the hashtag, then you can find things that are being posted about Occupy Wall Street or whatever. And this is a chart that somebody came up with. I found it on Google+. This has been annotated and modified a little bit. It originally said that, where should you post your status? Well, if you don't care about anybody seeing it, put it on Google+. And a Google Plus fan had to write in and say, well, no, yeah, if you make it private and it's only visible to your immediate contacts, that might be true, but if you make it public, then Google is going to index it really well, so yeah, lots of people will see it. So that's the argument for Google Plus right now. And it is growing. I mean, it's got a ways to go to that Facebook 850 million. It's got like 40 million users, but that's just since June or July. And if it's not awkward to explain to your boss and it's sufficiently boring, you put it on LinkedIn. And if you really care about it, getting it out there, you put it on Facebook, and you get the idea. All right, here's the movie break, I promise.
Other comments, people give us their life story. They've gone and looked into something, found something that we perhaps hadn't documented, and they give us a lot of really valuable technical information. So in that case, again, we go and check with the developers, is this true? Is it also going to be useful to our customers? And if so, again, we thank the person, update the page, and come back a week or so later and delete the comments. This is really awesome because we're thanking that person for the work they've done, but we're also giving our readers information that we actually hadn't provided. So it's a two-way street. So this is pretty cool. This is, in Confluence 2.10, we introduced a thing called the widget connector, and you're going to be seeing more of the widget connector in this presentation. This is the Confluence 2.10 release notes, and Nathan dropped a comment, he's from Dailymotion, saying, you know, why didn't you guys integrate Dailymotion into the widget connector? What the widget connector allows you to do is integrate various other social media into your wiki page. So he says, we're very disappointed here at Dailymotion. We thought the love was mutual. So Bill Arcanetti replied, he's the Confluence product marketing manager, and Jens replied, he's the developer who wrote the widget connector, and then I replied because it was only polite because the comment had been addressed to me. And at the end of it all, Nathan says, we're starting to feel the love, guys, and he offers to help us with the integration when we eventually do it. So that's pretty cool. In your documentation, turning the emotion of disappointment into love. So Twitter's a web service. You can go get a free user name, and then you've got 140 characters to tell the whole world what you're doing. So Twitter is awesome. It's short and it's punchy. People will read a tweet because it is short, and it's also shareable and interactive, so people can respond. They can read it on their phones. They don't have to go to twitter.com. They can read it in various desktop applications as well. So we were thinking about how could we use these really great features of Twitter in technical documentation. And one thing we came up with is using Twitter as a medium for release notes. What we do is at each major release of our product, so for example, this is Confluence 3.2, we tweet a series of tweets, and each tweet is about one of the highlights in the release notes. And each tweet also has a short link, a short, tiny URL of some sort pointing to the actual release notes. And each tweet also has a hashtag. I think you guys might call it a pound tag. So in this case, #Confluence32. Now, typically when you're in a Twitter client, if you click a hashtag like #Confluence32, you get a list of all the tweets that contain that string. So if you think of a list of all the tweets that are tell you the highlights in the release notes, that is basically the release notes. So we're using Twitter as a medium for our release notes. Of course, other people can hijack your hashtag. You don't own it. So you can see there somebody else has tweeted something about Confluence in Dutch. That wasn't us. So is there a chance that someone will say something nasty in your, quote, release notes? Well, yes, there is. And that's actually what it's all about. If someone does, you need to go and respond to it and just basically keep the conversation going.
So this is Sarah Maddox. She's a technical writer at Atlassian. Now, she might be somewhat predisposed here because Atlassian makes Wikisoft. So they're sort of in this community editing mode and participation mode. But part of what she was talking about was getting feedback from people where they might be disappointed about something and getting into a conversation with them, giving them feedback. And she says, well, by the end of this process, they were starting to feel the love. So we were turning disappointment into love. And I think that was comments on the wiki or the documentation itself on their website. Then she goes on, she talks about tweeting out the release notes, putting them out as posts on Twitter, and tagging them so that somebody can click on one of those release notes and see the whole series of them. So another way of getting information out. So, presumably they're tweeting out things like, that bug that you hated in the last release is gone now, or this wonderful improvement that you've been crying out for is here now. Elsewhere in this, she also talks about using different approaches for different kinds of content. Even at her company, even at a company that makes wiki software, they do have a little bit of a breakdown there. So for some developer documentation, some API documentation, they'll invite everybody in, and anybody who can create an account can basically edit, update, post new examples, and that's really good for getting new code samples or new examples of how something can be used. For the more formal documentation, they do keep a somewhat tighter lid on it. They do have members of the community who have rights to edit, but they vet them first, and they make them sign an agreement first. So, a little bit more protective of the formal documentation. And this is a breakdown that you can use or consider using too, is that even if you want to keep more control, you can also still have some way of people commenting back. So even if they don't edit it directly, they can point out that something is wrong and you can fix it. Or they can point out a great new example of how the product can be used. One of the things that those SEL people I referenced back at the beginning talked about too is some of these categories are breaking down, like the wall between technical documentation and marketing material. Because a lot of people will come in these days, because it's out on the web, and they'll try and read the documentation up front. And they'll see, how confusing does this sound? Does this sound like a difficult to use product? So if you're making it sound like a difficult to use product, you might have an issue there in terms of sales too. And there is a little bit of a shift in mode or mindset from being the writer, the editor, the guardian who is in control of the content to being a curator of content, particularly if you're in this wiki mode, where you're supposed to be doing sort of what those Wikipedia guys are doing when they come in and say, oh, wait a minute, this isn't quite right, this change that's been made. We've got to roll this back to the last version. At least we've got to reconcile these things. So you can be the guardians of the correct copy still. Let's see. And you do potentially have to deal with vandals and jerks. This is something from Wikipedia. We're talking about their quality control, where somebody has come into an article that I think is talking about marine sponges, and they've added the comment, "Get a life, losers." So you need to be able to be watching, either have an approval process or at least be able to take those things out. So there are the jerks, but then there are also the people who are very helpful. And where you have a good community, you've got to be treating that community well. So this is from something I found on SlideShare from somebody who works on the Mozilla project on Thunderbird, their email client. And he says, no literary critics, no grammar Nazis. Better to lose one knowledgeable but nasty editor than 10 enthusiastic contributors. And find ways of congratulating people, recognizing people. There's some reference to swag, whatever. If they're happy going around with a T-shirt with the product logo on it, give them the T-shirt. And there are other risks here. Social media overload is one. It's from an academic paper, but basically what this tries to show that is you're number of, this was specifically a Twitter study, but as the number of tweets go up, when it gets past a certain point, the number of people defecting and deciding that they're not going to pay attention to you anymore also goes up. So you have to be watching that curve. And at least in the marketing room, I've talked to all sorts of people who've tried to make a study of how many times a day is the bright magic number of things to post, and what is the overload point. Can't give you an absolute rule of thumb. In the marketing arena, and I think this would also apply to some of the stuff you do, there is a trend towards trying to respond and solve even customer service problems over Twitter, over other social networks. So this is somebody from Southwest Airlines, presumably replying back on a lost bag or whatever, saying, how can I help? And this is me trying to deal with comments on Facebook Tab Manager. So, this is all free software. This is WordPress and a plugin called Discus, which is associated with a service which allows people to log in using their Facebook identity or Twitter identity or whatever and post comments. And this is me saying, didn't you read the documentation? But apparently it wasn't clear.